"Everyone raise your glass," my stepson Tyler shouted, standing up at the head of the private dining room and tapping his wine glass with a butter knife. "To my mother's new husband, Mark, the human automated teller machine who finally gave my mom the life she actually deserves." The room went dead silent. My 78-year-old father, Arthur, lowered his fork slowly. My brother David stopped chewing. Around the long mahogany table at the Fairview Grill, 12 members of my immediate family sat frozen under the warm crystal chandeliers. I had spent 4 weeks planning this dinner for my father's retirement after 42 years running his hardware supply store. I paid for the private room, ordered the wine, and hand-selected the menu so my dad could finally relax and feel celebrated. Tyler wasn't even supposed to speak. He was 22 years old, arrived 45 minutes late wearing a designer jacket I had paid for 3 weeks prior, and brought 2 friends who weren't on the guest list. I put my hands flat on the white tablecloth and looked straight at him. "Apologize to my father and to me, Tyler. Right now." Tyler smirked, leaning back against his chair like he owned the entire building. "Oh, come on, Mark. Don't get your blood pressure up. It's a joke." I didn't blink. "It isn't a joke. Apologize." Before Tyler could open his mouth again, my wife Sandra reached across the table and slammed her palm down over my wrist. Her nails dug into my skin just hard enough to leave red marks. She didn't whisper. She spoke in a sharp, elevated tone that echoed off the high ceiling so every waiter in the hallway could hear it. "He is not your son, Mark. You don't get to correct him or tell him what to say." That was the exact second something inside my chest stopped vibrating. It wasn't anger. It wasn't heartbreak. It was a cold, absolute stillness. I turned my head and looked at Sandra. We had been married for 3 years. For 36 months, I had convinced myself that blending our lives meant swallowing my pride whenever her son acted like a spoiled tyrant. I paid for Tyler's downtown loft apartment, his truck lease, his college tuition at the state university, and his $400 weekly allowance, because Sandra told me he was finding himself after his parents' messy divorce. I looked down at her hand covering my wrist. Her diamond ring, the one I had upgraded for her 40th birthday, glinted under the chandelier light. "Take your hand off me, Sandra," I said quietly. She pulled her hand back, rolling her eyes toward the ceiling. "You are completely ridiculous. You're ruining your own father's party over a harmless piece of banter." Tyler snickered into his glass. "Yeah, lighten up, old man." My father reached over from his side of the table and placed his weathered hand on my knee. "Mark," he whispered softly, his voice trembling slightly. "It's fine. Don't cause a scene for my sake." That broke my heart more than Tyler's disrespect ever could. My father had spent his entire life working 60-hour weeks in dusty warehouses to give me a chance to build my commercial logistics business. He didn't deserve to sit in a luxury restaurant listening to a pampered 22-year-old mock the money that was currently paying for the steak on his plate. I picked up my cloth napkin, folded it neatly into a square, and placed it beside my plate. "You're right, Sandra," I said, looking her dead in the eye. "He isn't my son, and from this second forward, I will never make the mistake of treating him like one again." Sandra snorted. "Fine, be dramatic." I didn't say another word for the rest of the meal. I paid the $2,400 bill at the front desk with my personal card, walked my father to his sedan, held the door for him, and kissed his forehead. "I'm sorry about tonight, Dad," I told him. He looked at me through the open window, his gray eyes steady. "A man who lets people step on him in public will eventually get crushed in private, Mark. Do what you have to do." On the drive home, Sandra didn't wait 2 minutes before unleashing her fury. She slammed her purse onto the dashboard of my truck and turned toward me, her face flushed with anger. "How dare you humiliate Tyler in front of your family?" she barked. "He was trying to be funny! He's young!" I kept my hands at 10 and 2 on the steering wheel, staring straight at the dark highway ahead. "He is 22 years old, Sandra. He isn't a child. He is in college. He's failed 3 classes this semester because he spends 4 nights a week at nightclubs," I replied, keeping my voice flat and monotone. "And he just called me an automated teller machine in front of my father." "Because you act like one," she snapped back. "You think just because you pay for his rent and his truck, you own his soul? You're obsessed with money. I let out a single, dry breath. Then let's see how well he survives without it. That made her freeze. What is that supposed to mean? You'll see in the morning. She spent the next 20 minutes screaming at me, calling me cold, heartless, and selfish. She brought up my late mother. She brought up her ex-husband. She threatened to leave and stay at a hotel. I didn't answer a single sentence. When a woman shows you that she views your hard work as nothing more than an obligation, arguing is a complete waste of oxygen. We reached our house at 10:30. She stormed upstairs to the master bedroom and slammed the door so hard the framed photos in the hallway rattled. I walked into my home office on the ground floor, locked the door behind me, and pulled out my laptop. I didn't sleep that night. Not for 1 minute. At 5 o'clock in the morning, while the sky outside was still pitch black, I began pulling up our financial records. I am a commercial logistics manager. I review supply invoices, fuel surcharges, and truck maintenance contracts for a living. I know how to track every single penny through 5 different bank accounts without breaking a sweat. For 3 years, I had handed Sandra a business expense card tied to my company's secondary account, along with full administrative authorization for our joint household fund. I had trusted her. I thought she was managing household groceries, home improvements, and Tyler's legitimate school expenses. What I found on those bank statements made the blood freeze in my veins. Over 24 months, more than $145,000 had been transferred out of my corporate reserve account. Not for tuition, not for textbooks. The payments were wired directly to a company named Apex Management Solutions, LLC. When I ran a quick search on the state business registry, the owner of Apex Management Solutions was listed under 2 names, Sandra Miller and Tyler Miller. They hadn't just used my credit cards for dinners and designer coats. They had been systematically draining my commercial reserve fund to build a private cushion under their own names, while telling me it was paying for Tyler's education. I sat in the dark of my office, the white glare of the laptop screen reflecting off my face. My hands weren't shaking. My heart wasn't pounding. I pulled up my banking app and executed 5 precise clicks. I revoked Tyler's authorization on the corporate account. I canceled his high-end Ford truck lease payment agreement, which was scheduled to auto-renew that very morning. I terminated the automatic wire transfer for his $900 a month downtown loft apartment. I removed Sandra's name from my primary business consulting account. And finally, I transferred every remaining dollar of my personal liquid savings, nearly $210,000, into a brand new corporate trust account that required 2 independent signatures from my attorney and myself to access. At 6:15 in the morning, the door to my office clicked open. Sandra stood in the doorway wearing her bathrobe, holding a mug of coffee. Her eyes were still puffy from sleep, but her mouth was set in a tight, impatient line. "Are you done throwing your little temper tantrum?" she asked, leaning against the doorframe. "Tyler's tuition installment of $6,000 is due at 8 this morning. Wire it now so he doesn't get dropped from his classes." I closed my laptop smoothly, stood up from my leather chair, and straightened my collar. "I didn't wire it," I said. She frowned, her eyebrows knitting together. "Excuse me?" I said, "No, Sandra. I canceled the wire. I also canceled his truck payment, his apartment rent, his credit card, and his monthly allowance." Her coffee mug wobbled in her hand. The smugness evaporated from her face in less than 2 seconds, replaced by pure, blinding rage. "Have you lost your mind?" she screamed, stepping into the office. "He will get evicted. They will repossess his truck." "Then he better get a job at a warehouse," I replied calmly. "He's 22. He has plenty of energy. And as you reminded me last night in front of 12 people, he isn't my son." She took 2 fast steps toward my desk, slamming her mug down so hard coffee sloshed over the rim. "You miserable, vindictive bastard. You're doing this to punish me." "No," I said, pointing at the printed bank statement sitting beside my keyboard. "I'm doing this because I just discovered you stole $145,000 from my business through an illegal shell company called Apex Management." Sandra went completely white. The red flush on her neck vanished as if she had been doused in ice water. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out for 5 full seconds. That was an investment," she stammered, her voice dropping an octave. "We were building a family business." "You built a fraudulent siphon," I corrected her. And as of 6 o'clock this morning, the valve is permanently shut. She stared at me like she was looking at a total stranger. For 3 years, she had known me as the quiet, patient husband who fixed the plumbing, paid the bills without complaining, and took her out to expensive dinners on weekends. She had forgotten that before I was her husband, I spent 25 years running a logistics company that dealt with cutthroat corporate auditors and greasy union representatives. I didn't get angry. I got tactical. At 9:30 that morning, my phone rang while I was sitting in my corporate office downtown. It was Tyler. I answered on the second ring. "Speak." "What the hell is wrong with my card?" he yelled into the receiver. I could hear loud background noise. He was standing inside a luxury clothing boutique downtown. "I'm trying to buy a suit for a party tonight, and the clerk said my card was declined. Fix it right now!" "Your card is canceled, Tyler," I said into the phone, keeping my tone completely conversation-based and relaxed. "Along with your apartment rent and your truck." "Are you insane?" he shrieked. "You can't just cut me off. I have bills. I have a reputation." "You have 10 minutes to return that suit to the rack before the store manager asks you to leave," I replied. "If you want money, go talk to your mother. Or better yet, call Apex Management Solutions. I hear they have $145,000 sitting in an account somewhere." There was a dead, suffocating pause on the line. "What? What did you say?" he whispered, his loud bravado suddenly collapsing. "You heard me," I said. "Don't ever call my phone again." I hung up and blocked his number instantly. By noon, the fallout began spread through our social circle. Sandra didn't sit quietly. She did what every covert predator does when they lose control of their victim. She started a whispering campaign. My sister-in-law Karen called me at 1 o'clock. "Mark, is everything okay with you?" "I'm fine, Karen. Why?" "Well," she hesitated, her voice full of phony concern. "Sandra called me crying. She said you've been under extreme mental strain lately. She mentioned you've been having severe memory lapses, accusing people of stealing from you, and making bizarre financial decisions out of nowhere." I leaned back in my office chair and let out a soft laugh. "Is that what she told you?" "Mark, it's nothing to be ashamed of," Karen pressed on. "Burnout happens to men your age. Sandra said she's worried you might need a medical evaluation before you ruin your company." They were planting the seeds. Sandra was laying the groundwork to claim I was mentally incapacitated so she could challenge my control over our assets in court. It was a slick, ugly tactic. If she could convince our friends and family that I was suffering from early-onset dementia or severe psychological distress, she could explain away my sudden cancellation of her funds as the erratic actions of a sick man. "Karen," I said clearly, "I am going to send an electronic file to your email right now. Open it before you say another word." I hit send on a pre-prepared PDF containing 6 months of bank statements, the state registry document for Apex Management, and the explicit text messages Sandra had sent me demanding $6,000 for Tyler's non-existent college fees. Silence stretched over the line for nearly a minute as Karen reviewed the documents. I could hear her sharp intake of breath through the phone. "Oh my God," she whispered. She told us that money was going into a college trust fund." "Sandra is a liar and a thief, Karen," I told her quietly. "If she calls you again, tell her that my attorney will be contacting her by 4 o'clock today." I hung up. At 2:15, I sat down in the high-rise legal office of Gavin Vance, one of the sharpest forensic family law attorneys in the city. Gavin was 55, wore bespoke dark gray suits, and didn't waste time with emotional fluff. He read through my audit documents twice, tapping a silver pen against his wooden desk. "This is clean," Gavin said, looking up over his reading glasses. "She committed flat-out corporate embezzlement by transferring money from your commercial account into an entity she co-owned with her son. Since you kept your business strictly separate under your prenuptial agreement 3 years ago, she has zero legal right to those funds." "What about her claims that I'm mentally unstable?" I asked. Gavin sneered. "Standard defense strategy when a gold digger gets caught with her arm in the vault. We nip that in the bud immediately. I'm filing for emergency legal separation today, along with a temporary restraining order freezing all joint accounts and granting you exclusive occupancy of your home." "What about Tyler's truck?" "The truck lease is under your company's name," Gavin said with a cold smile. "Since he is no longer an employee or an authorized driver, I will have our repo agency retrieve the vehicle by tonight." "Do it," I said. When I drove back to my house at 5:30 that afternoon, the driveway was empty. Sandra's car was gone. But when I stepped into the kitchen, I realized she hadn't left for good. She had simply gone to recruit help. Sitting at my kitchen island were Sandra, her older brother Richard, a regressive real estate agent who had always looked down on my line of work, and Tyler. Tyler was sitting on a bar stool with his arms crossed, looking red-eyed and humiliated. Richard stood up the moment I walked through the door, pointing a finger at my chest. "Now hold on a minute, Mark," Richard barked. "You don't get to treat my sister and nephew like dirt under your shoe. We're here to settle this like men." I didn't take off my coat. I didn't raise my voice. I walked over to the kitchen counter, poured myself a glass of cold water, and took a slow sip.
"Richard," I said smoothly, "you have exactly 3 minutes to get out of my house before I call the local sheriff's department and have you arrested for criminal trespassing." Richard scoffed. "This is my sister's house." "Check the deed, Richard. The house was purchased 6 years before I ever met your sister. Her name isn't on a single piece of paper connected to this property." Sandra stood up, her eyes wide with desperate anger. "Mark, please, stop this madness. Tyler was crying all day. His landlord told him he has 48 hours to pay his rent or he's getting an eviction notice." I looked at Tyler. The arrogance he had displayed at the dinner table 24 hours ago was completely gone. He looked like a frightened boy whose safety net had been yanked away. "Why don't you pay his rent, Sandra?" I asked. "Or better yet, why doesn't Richard? He's his uncle, right? Family supports family." Richard shifted his feet, suddenly looking uncomfortable. "Well,
I have my own expenses right now, Mark. That's not the point." "That is precisely the point," I interrupted. "It's very easy to demand generosity when someone else is paying the bill. The second it comes out of your own wallet, your courage vanishes." Right on cue, a large black tow truck pulled into my driveway, its yellow emergency lights flashing through the front windows. Tyler leaped off his bar stool and ran to the window. "What the hell? Is that my truck?" "It isn't your truck, Tyler," I said, taking another sip of water. "It belongs to my logistics firm, and the repo driver has strict orders to take it back to the fleet yard." "You can't do this!" Sandra screamed, grabbing my arm. "He needs that truck for school!" I shook her hand off my arm with one sharp motion. "He isn't going to school, Sandra. He hasn't attended a single lecture since October. I called the registrar's office at 1 o'clock today."
He was academically suspended 2 weeks ago for non-attendance. Sandra froze. She slowly turned her head toward her son. "What?" Tyler shrank back against the kitchen island, his face pale as paper. "Mom, listen, I was going to appeal it." "You lied to me?" Sandra gasped. "You told me you were making the dean's list." "He lied to both of us," I said, setting my glass down on the counter with a loud clack. "Because you raised him to believe that honesty is optional as long as the money keeps flowing." At that exact moment, my attorney Gavin walked through the front door without knocking, accompanied by an off-duty county deputy who was holding a stack of legal papers. "Sandra Miller," Gavin said in a crisp, clear voice, "you are hereby served with an emergency order of legal separation, a temporary financial freeze, and an immediate notice to vacate these premises within 2 hours." Sandra looked from the legal papers to the police deputy, then to me. "Mark, please, we can talk about this. We can go to counseling." "The time for talking ended at the dinner table last night, Sandra," I said coldly. "When you told me I had no right to discipline your son, I finally understood my place in this house. I was your wallet. Well, the wallet is closed. Get your things and get out." The next 2 hours were a chaotic blur of slamming doors, crying, and frantic packing. Richard loaded Sandra's suitcases into his trunk while Tyler stood in the driveway, watching his custom Ford truck get hoisted onto the back of the tow truck. By 8 o'clock that evening, my house was totally quiet. I sat on my front porch in the cool autumn air, holding a fresh cup of black coffee. My father drove up 10 minutes later in his sedan. He walked up the porch steps slowly, sat down in the wooden rocking chair next to mine, and looked out over the front lawn. "They're gone?" Dad asked quietly. "They're gone," I answered. He took a slow breath, nodding his head. "It hurts now, son, but living with a parasite hurts a lot longer." "I know, Dad." Over the next 4 months, the war shifted from my living room to the courtroom. Sandra didn't go down without a fight. She hired a hotshot divorce attorney who tried every greasy trick in the book. They claimed that the $145,000 taken through Apex Management was an agreed-upon spousal allowance. They claimed I was abusive, cold, and financially controlling. They even tried to demand 50% of my commercial logistics business. Gavin shredded every single one of their arguments into confetti. We brought forward 3 years of spotless corporate audit records. We produced text messages from Sandra thanking me for helping Tyler with his education. We presented the academic suspension letter from the university proving that Tyler was no longer a student when those funds were requested. And then came the knockout blow. During a court-ordered financial deposition in February, Gavin laid out a set of bank records he had subpoenaed from Sandra's personal accounts. It turned out Sandra hadn't just used the Apex Management money to finance Tyler's luxury lifestyle. She had developed an addiction to online day trading options over the past 18 months and had lost nearly $90,000 of the stolen money in high-risk stock gambles. When her own attorney saw those trading statements for the first time in front of the judge, his face went completely blank. He asked for a 15-minute recess, pulled Sandra into a private conference room, and told her in plain language that if she went to trial, she was risking federal wire fraud charges. 2 weeks later, Sandra signed a complete settlement agreement. She received $0 from my commercial logistics business. She received 0 alimony. She was forced to relinquish all claims to my house, my retirement accounts, and my personal assets. In exchange for me agreeing not to pursue criminal charges for corporate theft, she agreed to forfeit her share of our joint liquid account and hand over the title to a small lake cabin she had inherited from her aunt. I sold that cabin 3 weeks later for $85,000 and deposited every cent straight into my father's medical reserve trust. As for Tyler, without my credit card, his luxury loft lease was terminated within 30 days. He couldn't afford the $4,000 back rent, so his landlord filed a formal eviction on his record. His fancy friends scattered like cockroaches the second he stopped paying for VIP tables at clubs. Last month, I drove down to my father's hardware supply warehouse to check on a shipment of commercial fasteners. As I walked through the loading dock, I saw a young guy in gray work pants and a sweaty, grease-stained t-shirt hauling 40-pound wooden crates off the back of a flatbed truck.
His hands were calloused, his hair was messy, and he looked completely exhausted. It was Tyler. My father had hired him as an entry-level dock worker at $14 an hour after Sandra refused to let him move back into her small rented apartment. Tyler caught sight of me standing by the warehouse office door. He froze for a second, holding a heavy crate against his chest. 3 months ago, he would have rolled his eyes, made an arrogant joke, or demanded money. This time, he didn't smirk. He didn't say a word. He lowered his head, tightened his grip on the wooden box, and walked past me toward the storage racks, working hard to earn his own paycheck for the very first time in his life. I watched him walk away, felt the quiet weight of the warehouse floor under my boots, and knew that for the first time in 3 years, everything in my life was finally back in perfect balance. I walked into my father's office, poured 2 cups of black coffee, sat down across from the man who raised me, and got back to work.